Good afternoon. How's everybody today? See a few waves. I'm Dave Ferguson, Dean of the College, and happy to welcome you here today, and also to welcome those in attendance at our CAP Indy site. So we've got a busy, and I'm very happy that we're launching our guest lecture series today, which is, as many of you know, a mainstay of our culture here, and we do put these on our YouTube channel, but it's always better to be in person, so thank you for coming. We've got a busy fall coming up in the guest lecture series. Our guest lecturers this fall will include Katie Swenson, Seiko Cook, Marlon Blackwell, and Alexandra Lang. And you can watch email and our screens in the building for more details on each of those. But while I'm looking forward to all of those lectures, we also have made a concerted effort this year to begin to spotlight some of the amazing work our alumni are doing across the country, and that's what tonight is about. So I'm very pleased to kick off that effort today with Randy Schumacher, and here to tell you more about Randy is Bob Kester, Professor of Architecture.
They're already clapping for you, Randy. So thanks for being here. As Dave said, this is a great opportunity to hear about an alum who has had a remarkably successful career. Graduate of this college in 1986. That means he graduated from here before most of you were born. Think about that one. And he was a student of mine. Think about that one. Randy had a reputation in the college. He was a real hard worker, and he did exceptional design work. In fact, he was so skilled at his ability to illustrate his ideas that Paul Lasso included him in one of his books back in 1986, showing some of that early work. So we're so thrilled that Randy's here. I'm delighted to introduce him. He graduated, as I said, in '86. He moved to Chicago right away, worked up there for a few years, came back to Indianapolis, which is actually his hometown. He's gotten numerous awards in his career, including 7 design awards from the American Institute of Architects. He also received the Building of the Year Award and the Architect of the Year Award from the National Industrial and Office Park Association. His work has been published in national venues, including the Architectural Representation Handbook, which Paul Lasso again prepared, as I mentioned. And he was, this featured his 3D computer work back in the day when we didn't have Lumion and other such tools. This was when things were done by hand and then translated into the most basic hidden line computer representation. So he was on the cutting edge of that back at the time. Randy right now is a principal and owner at CSO, which is a large firm in Indy. He's here today to tell us more about a very, very exciting project. This is the National Desert Storm and Desert Shield War Memorial. It's going to be built in Washington, D.C. So please join me in welcoming Randy Schumacher.
Test. Can you hear me without this mic? Because I have a mic on my chest. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's kind of amazing. I have vague memories of sitting over there. But thank you so much for that really wonderful introduction. I'm not used to hearing such things. I'm usually sitting over there watching those kinds of introductions. So thank you. It is such a joy to be here to share this project with you. I have to admit, it still kind of amazes me that I've had the opportunity to work on this kind of a rare project. It was a long shot from the beginning, but when we got going with it, just things seemed to happen. It wasn't without some incredible challenges and setbacks, but it's still ongoing. And I should point out that We are in the middle of the design development phase. So we're not done designing. We're in the middle of DD. So I'm going to take you through everything it took to get here. I'll show you some pretty recent design, some kind of in-progress stuff. And then if you want to ask questions, we can do questions. In typical architect fashion, I probably have too many slides. I will try to be really fast because your attention span is probably a little less than mine, and mine isn't so great. So I'm with CSO Architects. We are, well, I guess we're a pretty large firm now. Our billings are the top in the state of Indiana. We've got about 96 professionals. We've got about 30 architects and 29 or so graduate architects, and I think 10 or 12 interior designers. So we're a pretty good-sized firm. And one of the great things about CSO, pardon the infomercial, I got to tell you just a little bit about me and where I'm coming from. But we do an incredibly diverse amount of work in many market sectors, from schools to corporate headquarters to, we worked on the Indianapolis airport. We do an incredible variety of work: housing, higher ed, K through 12. We have an interior design studio, as I mentioned. So there's never a dull moment at CSO. So I'll tell you first a little bit about, just give you a rough idea of the whole kind of timeline of this project. And I'm going to need my glasses for this, so pardon me for a second. But like I said, this started in about 2011. I mean, Scott Stump, the CEO of the effort to build this memorial, formed his board in 2011. I began working on it in early 2012. And did an early design, and we got our enabling legislation based on that. Then we went through over 3 years of site selection. We fought for over 3 years just to get this site. And when you see the site, you're going to understand why. It's probably one of the top, most beautiful pieces of real estate on the National Mall in Washington. I mean, it's just an astoundingly beautiful and perfect piece of hallowed ground for this memorial. So we fought for over 3 years for it. I should say we worked collaboratively, but it was tough at times. So I estimate at this point, based on where we're expecting to complete construction documents, we'll have almost 5 years in design, following the site award, and then 18 months of construction. So just zooming in a little bit, when the board approached CSO and asked for our help, there was first a research phase. And in that research phase, I did a lot of research and talked to a lot of veterans, and actually did a survey that I'll tell you about shortly. But there was a lot of, you don't just jump into the design of a national war memorial, obviously. So there was a period of time for that. We did a preliminary design because the original request was, we want to build a memorial, but we've got to go to Washington, and we need enabling legislation, but we need to show them something. We can't just wave our hands and say, we want to build a memorial. We need some sketches. Will you help us with these sketches? So I did those sketches in 2012 and 13. And then then there was a period of 17 months of just getting enabling legislation from the U.S. Congress. You have to be authorized by Congress to do this. You have to convince them that you're worthy, and you need legislation. And then following that was, as you can see there, the 3 years of site selection, which is the process by which the federal government and the appropriate agencies award you the ground. So the federal government gives you the site, and you have to privately raise the money to build it and design it. But this enabling legislation says this association headed by Scott Stump, you are authorized to do this. So we had to go through all of that. And then now we're in the midst of this 4-year, 9-month concept design, design development, construction documents, federal approvals, and then construction. This picture here this is actually my schedule. And I don't know if I should even be showing you this mess because, I mean, this gives you just a snapshot of, I mean, there are many tools you can use to schedule work and organize labor and organize your design team. It's kind of to each his own. But for me, I've got to manage on the top there is the technical design stream or the creative design task. So I've got a group of people doing creative design. There's the technical design is the track in the green. The blue is our bas-relief sculptor, and the gray on the bottom is our bronze sculptor. And all through this, we've got to manage federal approvals with the Commission of Fine Arts, cost estimating, we have a contractor on board, and all the while, you know, there's kind of this trinity. First we do work, then we show it to the Memorial Association. Then when they are okay with it, then we show it to the National Park Service, our sponsor. When they're okay with it, then we show it to the Commission of Fine Arts. So there's this kind of repeating cycle of meetings that this picture on the screen kind of helps me manage. So yeah, this, as I mentioned, this is a long shot. So if you're curious how CSO, I've already been asked, how did we get involved? Was there a national design competition? No, there wasn't. They decided, based on some other competitions, they did not want to have one. It was a conscious decision after they started working with CSO. We did the preliminary design, as I mentioned, but they basically received a recommendation for CSO from the Washington, D.C. American Institute of Architects. They called the DC AIA, they said, we need a veteran-friendly architect, who would that be? And somehow, to this day, I honestly don't know how or why they gave our name in Indianapolis, Indiana, but they did. And so Scott Stump called up my company out of the blue, and he said, I want to build a war memorial in Washington, D.C. I need some help. Will you help? And I think he had a board. He was a 501c3 at the time. He had no money yet. And he gave us this opportunity, and the owners of the firm decided, yeah, we want to help. We'll help you. We'll do whatever we can to help you. And it basically landed on my desk a few weeks later, and that's when I started the research phase, and I did the first kind of foundational design for the memorial, and that's really where it started. I got to be honest with you, when it started out, you know, my attitude was, you know, other war memorials are pretty epic, you know. Maya Lin changed the whole landscape of memorial design with her incredibly profound design for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Changed the way memorials are thought of with that. You know, the Lincoln Memorial is the gold standard of memorials, the most incredibly moving experience, you know. So when I started to think, okay, maybe I'm going to be designing something that might be in company with those, I thought, nah, but I'm going to give it everything I've got. And I'm going to start this out right in the beginning, like I'm designing this memorial. And if 10 years from now I'm still designing it, fantastic. But if I need if it doesn't work out that way, if they decide they want to have a national competition, I'll help them have a competition. I'll do whatever I can to help them. So I gave it everything I had. And that's probably why I'm standing here today. So the design process, how did this go down? You know, what is the design and why is the design the way it is? So I'll tell you about that. But the thing is, first, so the design of the National Desert Storm and Desert Shield Memorial is based on, it's to commemorate a historic event. So every aspect of the design of this is guided by some sort of a commemorative idea or symbolism or something on that order. It's got to be a very, very meaningful experience. So you have to understand the war, kind of what happened. On August 2nd of 1990, many of you weren't born, but a dictator named Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. He was in very bad financial situation the country of Iraq was, and they decided to take over the country of Kuwait. So on August 2nd, they crossed the border with their troops and their tanks, and they said, Kuwait is now the 19th province of Iraq. That's how it started. I'm sorry, I'm clicking the slides the wrong way. So they rolled into the town, they took over, Saddam Hussein made it the 19th province of Iraq, and while they were there, they didn't exactly treat the country as though it was going to be theirs. They destroyed a lot of the infrastructure, they destroyed homes, they looted retail stores, and before they left, before they were finally pushed out of the country, they committed the most heinous act of environmental terrorism ever seen. If we can't have your country, you can't have it either. They lit 600 oil wells on fire and turned the skies black in the middle of day with soot from the terrible act of terrorism that they committed there. But then some pretty amazing things happened. President George Bush and Secretary of State James Baker said the United States is not going to let this happen, because it threatened world peace and the stability in the Middle East, and there was a very real fear that they might also invade Saudi Arabia to the south of Kuwait and kind of take over control of the world's oil supply. And the United States said, this can't stand, and those two men formed a coalition of 39 countries from around the world, brought them all together and got them all to agree to be with the United States in facing this aggression. So it was really a very heroic thing. And what is so cool about it also is that 8 of those countries were Muslim countries. So it's kind of very remarkable that he was able to have the diplomatic skills to build this kind of a coalition to face this aggression. So the United Nations began to function as it was intended, as a body to try to establish peace and negotiate a withdrawal. Meanwhile, we implemented Operation Desert Shield to protect Saudi Arabia. So this is a protective thing, the shield, to stop the aggression and protect Saudi Arabia. But Iraq was not going to leave. There was no choice. So on January 17th, the air war began, and this gentleman here who I actually had the pleasure of meeting, General Chuck Horner, masterminded the air war. It was a 6-week air campaign that practically neutralized the Iraqi army. It was, at the time, thought to be the 4th most formidable army in the world. We were not just taking on some little country with a little army. We shipped 60,000 body bags to the area in preparation for the fighting. Time magazine asked on its cover, "Are we ready for this?" We had just come on the heels of Vietnam. I mean, literally, this is in 1991. In 75 or so, Vietnam was wrapped up. But our country's kind of esteem of our military was at a very, very low place. A lot of our military men and women were told not to wear their uniforms in public. They were not treated well because of Vietnam. And that very poor feeling towards our military lasted until 1991. And I'm going to show you how this war changed America's perception of its military, and then how we represent that in the design of the memorial. So Horner masterminded this air campaign that was brilliant. Schwarzkopf developed the left hook plan. So after the air war, the ground war lasted just days. And essentially what we did is they expected our army would come up from the south out of Saudi Arabia. So they were ready for us. We even faked them out a little bit with some troops coming up out of Saudi Arabia. But the vast majority of our fighting force went into Iraq, into the desert, and all those arrows over there, that left hook punch, we knew they would retreat from Kuwait. And we cut off their path of retreat with the left hook. So that shortened the war. It saved thousands and thousands of lives of coalition forces, United States of America forces, because it was ended so quickly. We lost 383 men and women in the conflict, 383. And we sent 60,000 body bags there, not knowing really what was going to happen, to liberate their country. That's what happened when they tried to retreat to Iraq. And we liberated the country. And what happened was this really incredible display of affection and gratitude to the United States from Kuwait, of course. We saved them. We went there. We built up over many months. We liberated their country. And it was a pivotal event because the world came together for good. In the world we're in right now, you just don't see a lot of this. You can think about things that are happening right now in history. And, you know, we can't run to the aid of everyone. But this time, we were able to do it. And it was pivotal because the United Nations functioned as it was supposed to for one of the first times. It brought together all those countries. It also changed America because, this headline said the Vietnam syndrome is gone. So this lack of esteem for our military was literally wiped away, and our military men and women became heroes overnight. There was a parade on Constitution Avenue because of this victory. You know, the smart bombs were used for the first time. Careers were made in the news reporting what was happening over there. And the words, "thank you for your service," that we all say, probably very few people know that that really happened because of Desert Storm and Desert Shield. That's where those words really came from. So how do you turn that into a design? Somebody comes to you and says, "We want to build a memorial because we don't want the world to forget this happened." How do you do it? Well, you look at Washington, D.C., and the first thing I said was, we have to have a site. We can't design this in thin air and then plop it down. So I went looking, and there's this Memorials and Museums Master Plan. And they basically, in this master plan, identified in 2001 100 candidate sites in Washington, D.C. for memorials. And 20 of them were deemed to be preeminent, really, really good sites. And so CSO and I think I even had some interns from Ball State helping me with some of that. We went through these 100 sites and narrowed it down to the few we liked and studied them. This map is a piece of legislation that was passed, I think, in 2006. Yeah, 2006. The red area is what they legislated would be the reserve, and they would no longer allow memorials to be built in that zone. And it's the prime real estate. It's the mall. The reflecting pool, of course, the White House, the whole area that reaches all the way down there to the Jefferson Memorial. On the far left there is the Lincoln Memorial. And I indicated, you can barely see, I think, right here. Can you see my cursor up there on the screen? No, you can't see my cursor. Okay, well, the triangular piece, the triangular shape attached to the north side of the Lincoln Memorial there. Oh, there we go. So this parcel right here was at the time the parcel I thought was the place we should study. It was close to the Lincoln Memorial, it was close to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and this important historic juxtaposition of Desert Storm with Vietnam could be represented in a memorial there, because this is the Vietnam Memorial, that's Lincoln, so I was looking at that piece of real estate. Eventually, we would end up right across the street. So there's that piece of real estate. Here's Vietnam, of course, Lincoln Memorial. This is where we actually ended up after that 3.5-year site selection process. So I wasn't too far off for, kind of taking a stab at it. So we did it. I started studying it to sit on that site. I did the survey. I needed to understand what would be meaningful in this memorial for the people who fought in the war, their families, for everyday Americans who would visit it. How do you design a memorial to honor 383 lost lives? How do you design a memorial to commemorate the historic importance of those events I just described to you? It's not really easy to get your head around. But I started by talking to veterans. And I did this survey. I wrote up 5 questions, and I asked them. And we put it out to their database of veterans, which turned out, I think we got about 50 or so responses. Not huge, but not bad. And I was able to go through all the responses, tabulate them, and understand what's on the minds of the people who served. How did they remember it 20 years later? And what are the recurring themes? What really is historically significant and memorable to them? And it was actually very, very helpful. And these guiding principles, or these kind of 6 themes that came out of that survey, most of them are still, actually all of them, are still influencing the design today. Some of them in very, very significant and direct ways. Honoring those who served. The 39-nation coalition is represented in the design. The uniqueness of the desert environment. They wanted it to feel almost like the desert. The threat of chemical weapons. The left hook maneuver that flanked the enemy. And the significance of the quick, decisive victory that kind of changed America's perception of its military. So taking these kinds of influences, I went to work on this site sketching. And this is actually one of the very first sketches I did. And here was the thought. I knew that to create an appropriate memorial experience, that I wanted to create an enclosure of some form. I wanted to enclose a space so I could control the experience. There's a cacophony of cars and buses and tourists, and there's airplanes overhead because Reagan Airport's very close by. I felt like I needed to kind of shield out the outside world to a certain extent to create a meaningful and appropriately somber memorial experience. And so I started thinking of how do I enclose space? And the left hook idea was not that hard to really connect. So I started exploring this idea of this left hook, enclosing space, and could it be some sort of a dune-like representation of the desert environment? And I started exploring that idea, and I developed it further, and I did research, and I didn't want to do any of the already known things. You know, I didn't want to do a golden mean or a snail shell or, you know, a cosmic, you know, so I went to work with clay, and I really developed my own idea of a piece of sculpture that would represent the left hook maneuver. It would be, it would enclose a space, and it would give me kind of a canvas on which to tell the story of the war and lead people sequentially through an experience. And I envisioned that people would probably enter and walk along this wall, and I envisioned that I could put bas-relief carvings on the wall to tell the story of Desert Storm. And I shaped it just kind of intuitively, and I felt like it needed to kind of build up to a tallest point up here, have some element in the middle that would be a very strong commemorative feature. And what I didn't know at the time was, in deference to the National Mall, which is one of the most important cultural landscapes in the United States of America, that they really don't want anything tall to be built anymore. And this, at its apex, got to be about 16 feet tall, maybe 18. And I would later learn that we would get about 6, 7, or maybe 8 feet of height, and that's it, because we needed to stay low, in deference to the Lincoln Memorial. But over time, I developed this design. And I hired a local watercolor artist to produce these images. You can see in this rendering the bas-relief carving that tells the story that leads people eventually. I had actually the names of the fallen carved in there, the 383 names, which have since are not appropriate for this memorial, we've since learned. And I had a sculpture in the middle, and the thought was it would be constructed with basically sand-colored stone of some type. And so that was the design. It took me longer than you might think, probably 18 months to 20 months of going back and forth, meeting with the board, looking at options. We did look at a lot of different options and a lot of different variations, but that was the one we went with, and it resonated with people. Scott Stump took it on the road, showed it around both chambers of Congress, and was able to get the 2 bills passed, or in the House and in the Senate, for our enabling legislation. And Also what happened is during that time, a lot of people saw the design and it resonated with them. They liked the left hook. They liked the symbolism. It was kind of, as was my intention, was to have a kind of iconic, profound shape that would be memorable. I mean, and so I thought of that left hook wall as a piece of sculpture in its own right. That was the intent. So we got the enabling legislation, and so there it is. So Scott Stump called me when they were going to do the vote, and he said, Randy, I'd never met him. So after all this, I had never met Scott Stump in person. And he said, they're going to vote on our bill. Do you want to come to Washington and see it happen? I said, yeah, I think I'll do that. So I went to Washington, and we're texting each other. I'm sitting, on that day it was actually super, super hot, and the sun was still out. And I'm texting him, I'm wearing a black suit in the sun, saying, I'm at some bench, I'm over by the stairs. And he says, well, what do you look like? I said, well, I'm in a black suit and a red tie. Nah, I need more to go on. Well, yeah, I had to tell him about the hair. So I met Scott for the first time. He's right there in the black suit and the red tie with a high and tight. Scott's a Marine, and I'm going to tell you about Scott. But so after that, we get our legislation, and we begin the site selection, the official site selection phase. I'm pausing here because there are some slides that somehow I seem to have missed. But anyway, we'll roll with it. So we got our we got our legislation. Now we have to begin the site selection phase, which is the official part. What I did was just guesswork. This is the 3-year, 3-month trying to get the real site. So we needed to hire, it was suggested strongly that we hire some consultants to help. Alan Harwood, sorry Alan, that's the best picture I could find of you. He's with AECOM. I have to give, he's been a strategist. Some people call him the godfather of memorials. He's working on almost probably every major memorial in Washington as a consultant. He knows how to work through the federal approvals process. And you really need a tour guide for that, let me tell you. So he's been helping us with that and advising us how to get approved on various things. We also interviewed a number of landscape architects, and after an interview process that I assisted with, we hired the Olin Studio and Skip Graffam, who is, in my opinion, one of the very finest landscape architects in the country, and just a really, really great guy to work with because he's very collaborative. And so I'll tell you more about the work he's done as we work through this. But with these two guys helping out and leading the design. So at this point, Skip is now going to be the lead designer of the project because it's a landscape-based project, and there's obviously you can't take that left hook design I did and plop it. We did study it further, but we needed to expand the design team and bring in some additional talent, and Skip has been and his team at the Olin Studio has been perfect. We started looking at many sites, as you know, from the Museums and Memorials Master Plan. We eventually narrowed it down to 3 sites, which is the site we wanted at 23rd and Constitution. So this site right here, so that's the Lincoln Memorial, just north of the Lincoln Memorial, and this is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. If you extend the line of that wall, it goes right to our site. So that is really the site that was our preferred site. Another site was way up here, Walt Whitman Park. It's a city park. It's surrounded by buildings, and being a city park, it's literally got busy city streets on all four sides. Great place for a park, but it wasn't exactly where we wanted our memorial. And the other option was the Belvedere. So if you extend the axis of Constitution Avenue, which is where they had the parade to commemorate the war, if you extend that axis until it hits the Potomac River, they built this kind of this terrace element there that terminates Constitution Avenue. So it's symbolically kind of important. It's on this axis. However, there's a spaghetti of roads that separate it from the National Mall. So those were the three sites, and we had to study them at length. So we studied Walt Whitman Park. We studied 23rd and Constitution. We had to do legitimate design studies to show the Commission of Fine Arts that we're really serious, that we will take a serious look at putting this memorial on all three sites. And you can see on this one, we were still playing with the left hook idea a little bit, but honestly, it just didn't work there. It didn't. And we started realizing that maybe a dual wall scheme worked better. So this idea of a double wall scheme started to take root, and also we started looking at the circular idea, but still the idea of enclosing a space was at the center of our studies. And so that was literally a cocktail napkin sketch of the dual wall scheme from one of our impromptu meetings. And then these are the studies for the Belvedere. So the dark area to the left, of course, is the Potomac River. And that site was very, very flawed. It's wedged up against the Potomac River with the network of roads, and you don't even see all the roads that are just off that image that isolate it from the National Mall. So what happened is the Commission of Fine Arts actually voted to put us at the Belvedere, and we weren't excited about that. However, the National Capital Planning Commission and the National Park Service wanted to put us at 23rd and Constitution. And by the Commemorative Works Act, they have to agree. So they didn't agree, so we had to go back and do another study to try to convince the Commission of Fine Arts that we belonged at 23rd and Constitution. So we did photographic studies. We shot videos of the Belvedere showing them this is no place for our memorial. It's really hard to get to. You got to cross 13 lanes of traffic if you're a pedestrian. But then this site, this is the site we wanted. 23rd and Constitution, beautiful piece of ground. In the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial, Abraham Lincoln being the biggest liberator in our country's history, fantastic adjacency to the other memorials, and the thematic connection, I think I already kind of mentioned, the thematic connection with the Vietnam conflict and the Vietnam Memorial. And then Alan Harwood also came up with this persuasive illustration showing that Constitution Avenue is kind of the axis of ceremony in Washington. It's where the parade was. And then 23rd Street is really the axis of diplomacy, because you've got two major complexes of buildings for the Department of State up there shown in blue, and the Institute of Peace. So the intersection of all this just seems to be this thematic nexus that is very, very meaningful, that, again, supported our argument why we should be located at 23rd and Constitution. We had scholars come out and present white papers and testify. That Secretary of State, James Baker, shot a video telling the Commission of Fine Arts that they should give us the site at 23rd and Constitution. We worked up a design, a full design. Here, it's starting to take shape as a two-wall design. Here, it's shaped more like, kind of like an egg. Those allays of trees are actually extremely important. They're part of the Macmillan Plan for Washington, D.C. So these allays of trees that go on, this alley of trees goes all the way down to the Lincoln Memorial. So honoring those, we wanted to nestle up to them, but honor them and not interfere with them. So we worked out a design and showed how we could do that. And then this image was a very important persuasive image because it shows how our memorial opens up to the Lincoln Memorial. We're not blocking the view of the Lincoln Memorial. We've designed the walls to create our experience and a very meaningful experience while also being respectful of the Lincoln Memorial. So there's the Commission of Fine Arts. Literally the day they're deciding our fate on the site, and we got the site. So there's Scott Stump digging a shovel full of the dirt at 23rd and Constitution on June 21st. I think it was 18. And those are some of the board members. Kent Shively on the left, C. Freeman, Kyle Leggs was a colonel, he's on the right there, and Scott Stump. So I got to tell you a little bit about the board. They tell us in Washington that we're not like the other memorials. If you go to some of the other memorial websites, you'll see movie stars, four-star generals, politicians, and that's fine. I would never say anything bad. But they just go about it a different way. This memorial, this war was fought by volunteers. We didn't have a draft. This war was fought by everyday Americans, you know. And this memorial is headed up much the same way. The board of directors, they're all veterans from the war. Kyle there on the right is the senior ranking officer on the board. Scott, who's actually the CEO, was a Lance Corporal when he served in Desert Storm. And we just didn't do it with the big, you know, $500 plate galas. They have raised money with bake sales and their website and some generous donors. They've had a few donors. And you might have heard that the state of Kuwait made a very significant and generous donation, which is making the memorial possible now. So then we went into the real design. So how are we on time? Where are we at? So we're at 4:49, and I'm more than halfway through, and I will try to move quickly and keep this interesting for you. It was a very collaborative design process. Skip, myself, we brought in sculptors to work on the team with us. The Commission of Fine Arts input to us was, you really, really need to develop how the whole thing works together in a meaningful way to tell the story. It can't be a piece of art here and inscriptions over there, so to speak. It really needs to be a cohesive whole that creates a meaningful sequence of experiences that resonate. So there's Skip, we're in the center there working with two of our sculptors. Robert on the left is a bronze artist who is working on the falcon and the eagle. Jim Nance is on the right. So we began to refine the memorial. So on the left there, you have the egg-shaped version where it had become a two-walled scheme. On the right, we're starting to actually go through and I credit Skip Graffam. He did things with this design that I never could have. It was really brilliant, the amount of study that went into these two curving walls. They're not just gestural and just totally sculpted in clay. They've been studied exhaustively by his staff to open up to the view of the Lincoln Memorial, so that this portion of the wall is the lowest, and it opens up in this area to create an entrance. And we've created some dune-like spaces in the middle to create shade, to make the memorial a pleasant place to be. So it's not just killed with sunshine. We've got, so I'm going to move on. So we went through a lot of study about the shape of the walls. The egg-shaped design was bisected or bifurcated by the circulation path. And we realized with some input from the Commission of Fine Arts, who's been extremely helpful, that we really shouldn't allow this bifurcation, this movement to move right through the middle of the memorial, but rather go back to this left hook idea and curl people in and move them through this experience. And then Skip Graffam added this aspect to it where as you move through the memorial, you're slowly rising. It's very subtle, but the whole memorial is a study in subtlety. As you move through this left hook path, you slowly rise to an apex in the center, and you consider freedom. The fountain in the middle would be the coalition fountain, which will commemorate the 39 countries in the coalition and give you a view of freedom. As you look at the Lincoln Memorial and look across the lawn where people have recreation, there's this whole meaningful sequence. And what's also interesting is the way it actually has a dialogue with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Not only is there that historic juxtaposition that I told you about, where there was Vietnam, there's a period of kind of national angst over it, and then Desert Storm brought some closure to it. A lot of the people that served in Desert Storm served in Vietnam, but they were officers in Desert Storm. So it brought this kind of healing closure to the nation. And our design almost has a dialogue with their memorial because it's a very angular expression. They literally created a place of mourning. There's 59,000 names there. Very important, profound, incredible design that Maya Lin came up with to create this kind of place for America to heal. But as you enter it, many of you have probably been there, I'm sure, you walk down, you descend. You descend into this kind of dark place to mourn. Whereas if you go back to our memorial, it's a different kind of experience, intentionally, because we had a different kind of a war. It was a war to liberate a country. The loss of life was significant, but not what they want to dwell on for this memorial. This memorial is about liberation. It's about the world coming together for good. So it takes this curling, curvy shape based on the left hook. So the shape of the walls went through extensive study. Believe it or not, there are different kinds of dunes. And we studied the Barkin dune and the angles and the shape of them. Our wall, we studied different heights and different angles. And how do you experience a bas-relief sculpture when it's on a 22-degree tilted wall? Should be 22 degrees, 25 degrees, 30 degrees. We built mock-ups of the walls. We modeled it in 3D. We constructed it in virtual reality and moved through it. We were consulting with our sculptor. What does it do to a bas-relief when you tilt it back? It changes the way you experience it. It changes the way water settles into it and could freeze. There's all kinds of considerations involved with this. And then the fountain. So the fountain in the middle has become the primary way of commemorating the 39-country coalition. It's intentionally round. We looked at other shapes, but we came to the round shape as a symbol of unity, much like a wedding ring is. It's a very pure shape. It's low so that people can crowd around it and see people on the other side. The names of the countries will be inscribed around the edge of it. So whichever of those 39 countries you might be from, you can find your country. and see others from other countries gathered around this fountain. Another important consideration for the fountain is they're dry a lot. So they need to look good when they're dry. So we're designing it to have incredible water action, but at the same time, when it's dry, the shield needs to be a piece of art. So we're designing this shield to move water across it and have symbolism. Now here you'll see a sculpture, a figurative sculpture. Early in the design process, we wanted figurative sculpture. In working with the Commission of Fine Arts, the Commission of Fine Arts felt that the memorial would be stronger without it. Because we had a lot going on in the memorial, and they really felt that the power of the walls and what we do with the bas-relief would be enough. You know, it's all about subtlety. And we tried to convince them to go with the sculptures for some time. We designed these sculptures, we did maquettes. There's meaning in every pose you see there. But in the end, we took the advice of the Commission of Fine Arts and we went to the second wall, making the second wall in the memorial an inscription wall, a place of remembrance of those who served. Very simple and somber. You know, when we finally came to it, when the sculptures, when we agreed this, we would not have sculptures in the memorial, it was kind of a moment of clarity of, we really need, after people move through and experience the storm wall, a quiet place for people to contemplate all those who served. That's what our enabling legislation says. It's for all who served. So we created a place just for that, with the wreaths, the inscriptions. You move through the storm wall and you see the events of the war, and then you reach the inscription wall and have a place of quiet. Now design development. I'll go quicker. The granite needs to search the world for granite that looks like sand. It's not easy. There's almost none. We've done it. We think we found some granite that's going to work for us. We're studying it dry, wet. It looks way different when it's wet. We're looking, it's not decided yet, but we are looking at a Brazilian stone called Giallo Antico. It has good carvability qualities. It has a fine grain. A lot of granite has really mottled grain that if you carve it in a bas-relief, it'd be very distracting. So the search for the right granite has been quite an ordeal. We're developing the commemorative elements now in more detail. We're in the design development phase. So we're developing on the left there the storm wall with the bas-relief carving and the falcon and the eagle metal sculptures, which are a symbol of partnership between the United States and Kuwait. The falcon being the Kuwait national bird, the eagle, of course, is our national bird. So that wall moves you through this idea of the conflict and then liberation, and then the inscription wall, which is healing, and then the coalition fountain. So we're developing the commemorative features in great detail now. So we're zooming in on the different aspects of the wall. We've got a sculptor by the name of Emily Bedard, who is modeling this wall in clay and developing the sculptures, and we're doing mock-ups. So we're at the point now where we haven't built the whole thing in clay yet. Emily hasn't. We've built mock-ups, we've made clay castings, then we get them scanned, and then we use CNC technology to cut them into the granite. And the one on the left there is what it looks like right after the CNC machine has cut it. The one on the right is after the artists do their part. So you can't just scan it and have the machine cut it. It will have artists' hands finishing it and doing the final work on the carvings. She's working on the wreaths for the inscription wall. The eagle and the falcon sculptures are probably going to be done in stainless steel and mounted to the wall. We're working on how to mount them. We've been studying many different poses, and the sculptor Robert Eccleston has been meeting with, he's met with a falconer, he's been to the National Eagle Repository to study actual deceased eagles, which are sacred and controlled by law. And so they have a national repository where you can send our national bird if you find one that is deceased, and they will give it a proper burial. But anyway, he's been studying them and, literally making molds of all the different kinds of feathers on an eagle or a falcon. He's going to sculpt every single feather and build out of stainless steel the body, the bone structure, accurately so it's posable and can be reposed with clay on it so that we can then attach it to this rolling armature. And you see behind it the white wall there, that's a foam cutout of the granite wall. So he can then move the sculptures around in front of the walls so we can optimize the pose and study it and adjust it. And so it's really quite an impressive kind of undertaking here that Robert Eccleston has gone through. And he's only literally, this far. So there's still a lot to be done there to complete the sculpture. Lighting design, we have a firm called L'Observatoire out of New York City, one of the top lighting design firms in the country, thinking about what is this going to look like at night. Super, super important. All the memorials are visited at night, and we're looking at developing a lighting scheme from the base of the wall so the light would wash up across the bas-relief, as well as augmenting it with pole lights. The shield fountain is being designed by our team. The Olin Studio is developing a number of different schemes for it. And we've been talking to the Commission of Fine Arts about looking at cultural influences and how different cultures involved in the coalition or Kuwait's culture might influence the design of the shield. We've studied historic precedents. We've been doing lots of 3D computer modeling of what this shield could look like. And we're working with a water feature consultant because it's not all about looks, obviously. We've hired a firm out of Los Angeles called Fluidity, and they design water features. And they're talking to us about water action. You've never heard a vocabulary about water until you've met a water feature designer like Jim Garland. He talks about it in terms I can't begin to emulate, but from sparkle and different sounds, auditory effects, visual effects, different kinds of symbolism and different moods created. And he's thinking about all these details. The cross section through the shield, we've got to figure out, the plumbing, the crawl space beneath it, how much this is going to cost to build the crawl space, how you get to it, to service under there. We're getting into, OSHA requirements for confined space. I mean, it may be a memorial, but there's a lot to figuring out all of this and trying to design it so it'll last 100 years or more. I mean, that's on us every day. We have a budget, we have a certain amount of money, and we want to make sure it doesn't settle unevenly. It's got to last at least 100 years. So how do you do all this? So we're trying to think about every detail, working with the best talent we can find. And Olin Studio is they just started developing the landscaping And they're doing some tremendous things that we've reviewed with the commission that I can't even begin to present in a worthy way. But they are looking at ideas of, as you move through it, letting the landscaping also tell the story with plant materials of, the dynamic activity of the war and the conflict, and then the liberation, and then healing. So every aspect of it is being looked at. The structural design, dear Lord. So the National Mall. So the image on the left, this is the Potomac River, and that's the White House. So the Potomac River, a big chunk of the National Mall used to be river, including the site where we're building this memorial, used to be Potomac River. The McMillan plan, added all of that. And so the ground we're building on is fill that wasn't put in place scientifically by structural engineers. It's soft. It's very, very soft. And we're contemplating building this memorial, these big blocks of stone like the pyramids. We got this concept. We don't want to build slabs of stone and carve them and lay them up against a concrete wall. We said, let's build it like the pyramids. Can we do this? Can we build this concrete foundation that'll hold it up, and then carve these massive blocks of granite that we're going to buy in potentially Brazil, ship it to Italy to carve it, ship it to the United States and drop it on this foundation. But the ground is marsh. It's soft. So this is a shot of the foundation system, if you can believe that. That's a concrete mat. And I don't know what the count is now on the piles, but the piles need to go down to rock, which is 49 feet down. So the good news is there's rock down there that we can bear on. The bad news is we got to build 50-foot long piles to get to it and build some sort of a foundational mat that will evenly support the entire memorial. Because if we're building it like the pyramids, if all of a sudden the pieces of stone start to shift, well, that would be a disaster, and we can't have that. So we hired a structural firm out of Indianapolis, RC. I liked RC because they do a lot of forensic work and they study how things fail. They fix things. They know about water and freeze thaw and settlement. And so we did interview a number of structural engineers, and in the end of the day, we went with RC. And so they're helping us with this aspect of the design. So I'm almost done. Now into the real nitty-gritty. So we're starting to draw wall sections through it. I told you about, can we build it like the pyramids? You can see right now in these preliminary sections the massive concrete mat foundation that's sitting on those piles that go down to rock. And then another foundation that stair steps, because the whole floor of this memorial is sloped. Remember how I told you it ascends up to the peak? The whole thing is sloped. So those nice curving walls are not just curved in every which way, and they start at 0 and they go up to be 6 feet tall and they go back down to 0. They're convex, but the bottom of them also isn't flat either. So we're building probably the most complicated 3D model that I've ever been involved with. Buildings are nice, they're rectangular. This is all curves. So that's what this slab will do. And then we've got the granite here on shims with stainless steel dowels. And we are looking at a concrete wall behind it because we figured out if that was all granite, it doubled the cost of our granite that we're shipping from Brazil to Italy to the United States. So we are looking at a concrete backup wall. We've got to work out the drainage and the lighting detail, and so that's where we are. We're not done. We've got a lot more work to do. But it's been a pleasure and an honor to come here and share this with you. I hope it's interesting for you. And if you got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can ask the tough questions. I don't mind. So I'm here to hopefully help you guys learn something.
Get that microphone with you. There are one or two questions.
So the completion date?
Completion date, what's that?
Completion date is, we're shooting for Veterans Day 2024, November 11th. So the construction is 14 to maybe 18 months, but the real lead time is the stone. So we got to get the stone, then we got to ship it to Italy, and then they need a lot of time to carve it. And then ship it to the United States. So that's really our critical path. So everything right now is all about figuring out what stone are we going to buy, where are we going to buy it, is it carvable, get it approved by the Commission of Fine Arts. The stone and the carving is the critical path, but we really want to be done and dedicated on Veterans Day 2024.
Well, I want to thank you again, Randy, for coming. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And you held the audience the whole time and more. So thanks so
Okay.
much.
Good deal.
Thanks again.